Megan. Um, let me just check here and see who is with us. Senator Brock, are you with us? Two, three, we only have three committee members at this point. Let's just wait to see if Senator Brock joins us in a minute. We're going to start with, I think it makes sense to start with Megan and to go through just generally the major changes from the bill as introduced that the department would like to see, and then we'll switch back, I think, to Becky to see how she's incorporated those into the bill, and then we'll probably go back to Megan to go through her chart of the concerns that were raised and how the department approached those or what their position was on that. Does that make sense? I'm open to ideas on how to proceed here. And we'll have potentially Kate weigh in at the end. But does that make sense to you to set the stage, Megan and Becky?
Sure.
Okay.
All
right. So let's do that without necessarily starting with the bill in front of us, unless that helps you, Megan. Just generally, what were the problem areas that the big ones that you saw that needed changes from the bill as introduced? I know the cap kept coming up as one of them, but
yep. So good morning, Megan Sullivan, Executive Director of the Vermont Economic Progress Council. Thank you for having me in, Mr. Chair, and the committee. So the big one certainly is the cap, the $1.5 million cap, and the agency, our recommendation is to remove that there are already limitations that are in place based on the limited number of redevelopment projects that would be included, where increment would be being pulled from. So, and the requirement that the council check for viability is going to be a limiting factor. Putting the cap on at 1.5 is very restrictive. So our hope is that can be removed and use the guardrails that are otherwise outlined in terms of being that limiting factor.
So the excuse me for interrupting.
Sure.
The purist in me would agree with you. The politician in me says that we could benefit from a cap, even though it's rarely approached. What number would you suggest if you were told that we have to have a cap here, but if we did it at, $5 million or higher, you're fairly confident that most people approaching you would qualify?
Or Mr. Chairman, I add another thought to that, which is, or is there language that would be the equivalent of a cap, which identifies the scale we're trying to identify?
Yeah, I guess it's, determination of what the intent of the cap was. My recollection from our testimony last year was the cap was intended to ensure that this was used by smaller rural communities and not a use for larger communities who could potentially use the TIF district program instead. So if that is, still the committee's intention of why a cap would be important, you could go by population size, in terms of what are the eligible communities. I think if we're looking at a dollar figure cap, we just need to make sure that one, we're thinking about improvement costs as well as related costs, and that the municipal increment isn't included in that cap. Do we need to limit the amount of increment that on the municipal side that they're using towards this? So, if we were going to do a dollar figure, 5 million would certainly make more sense. But I would ask that we'd remove the cap on the municipal side, that's just in terms of how much educational fund increment was going to be used.
So, Mr. Chair, do you think if we identified population as for communities of 5,000 people or fewer, that or 4,000 people and fewer, that really gets at the scale that that inevitably sets the scale and would clearly, I think, identify a limit on cost.
Well, I don't know if does that assume that a town with 6,000 people has the wherewithal to go through the administrative complexities?
Well, I think that's a good question, which is, it would be interesting to see which towns in Vermont over a population of 5,000 or 6,000 have town managers and have professional staff. I mean, the key difference, I think what we're trying to get at is communities that don't have a full-time staff in place versus towns that do. And it would be very interesting for VLCT to give us those breakdowns, because my guess is that Woodstock's a population of roughly 3,000 people. It has a full-time town manager, but Reading, which has 700 people, doesn't. And yet Reading desperately needs a sewer system to, finance any economic development in that little hub. And it's got a very defined little, village center. To me, population could be a good eligibility criteria piece. Which
one of the issues is, as you look at population of Vermont towns, there are some surprising results. Georgia, for example, has 4,700 people. Rutland has 4,088 people. So I mean, there are real distortions there. Bristol has 3,800 people. On the other hand, you could look at something like Linden is 5,800 people. So I mean, the 5,000 cutoff has some things. You would ordinarily think Rutland would be someplace that would be in the business of being able to support a TIF conceivably, but you wouldn't expect Georgia to, or Bristol or Cambridge.
Right.
Yeah.
I sort of like the idea of a dollar cap with maybe, I don't know if we could do some sort of exception clause for extraordinary circumstances for good cause or something. I don't know if that just, the exception would swallow the rule if you did that, but what is the average, what are some of the examples? Let's say the Hartford TIF, how big was their TIF?
I think Hartford's TIF, off the top of my head, is around 13 million. But again, that's 10 years worth of projects. And that's determined because our TIF districts run between 6 million and 52 million. And that's determined based on what are the expected private developments that are going to generate the increment. So that viability is checked. So I think when you're talking about smaller communities, you're not necessarily talking about, major entertainment venues and hotel projects that could generate a ton of increment and raise the grand list. We're talking about, mixed use commercial, affordable housing, and industrial uses in an industrial park. So, I think there's limitations that are already going to be in place. when we're talking about a project for these communities.
So are we talking about if we put a cap, whether it was the $1.5 million, 5 million, whatever the number is, and we're excluding the municipal increment, are we talking about essentially the that the town is putting out to build the wastewater system, or are we talking about the amount of activity, private development that generates, and how do you cap that?
Well, they're going to be interrelated. So part of the plan is looking at what is the expected redevelopment, and what is the expected increase to the grand list from that. And that's going to give us an idea of what is the increment that's expected. And that expected increment is what would be the debt ceiling, saying that, okay, with your expected increment going to be used for the gap for this improvement cost and your related costs, and the interest, this is your sort of debt ceiling. This is what you can use the TIF for. And again, I would say if we're going to cap at a lower figure, it really should be just on the education fund side of that cap. But that's part of the work that we do in VEPC's review of TIF districts, and would be part of the application process for a project, is looking at what is the expected increment that's going to be coming in during that 20-year retention period for debt service payments, as the limiting factor of what the TIF can pay for.
So when you said Hartford was $6 million over a 10-year period, were you trying to?
No, 13.
I think Hartford was 13.
Over a
I think Hartford's much more than 6.
Oh, right, 13
Yep.
over a 10-year period. Mentioning
The range was 6 to 52.
okay. Mentioning the 10-year period was an indication that that's a bigger project than any cap.
That's multiple projects, right? That they are doing multiple projects over 10 years or throughout the district boundary.
And what are we saying in this bill? It's one project over how many years?
One project, one incurrence of debt. So there's no 10 years that you have to incur debt. You get to incur debt once for one project.
Okay.
So that, I think where we see a lot of the complications, a lot of the changes in statute are dealing with districts during that 10-year period of incurring debt and doing projects. And if you've got 3 different bond boats and you're tracking a lot of figures, that's where it gets really complicated. Not to say that doing any type of downtown development isn't complicated. It is. But when you're doing, you've identified one project that you're going to go to voters to incur debt for, it's that one incurrence of debt.
Okay. So I guess where I'm coming down on this one, this is partially political. I mean, we have a rougher road in the House with this bill, as Megan knows. And this has been framed as a pilot program to get our foot in the door. And I think if we vote out, will be somewhat in the nature of a pilot program. The cap will be raised or removed. The number of projects will probably be enhanced and the time period to look at. But I don't have a problem, let's say if we do this for 3 years, to get some experience out there and let the legislators and the politicians see that it worked and it wasn't as scary to the ed fund as some people think. So I think it's okay to do a $5 million cap, and with some criteria like you say in there that dictates the size, that will likely result in even smaller numbers, but in no event higher than 5 million. I don't know if 5 million is the right number, but I just instinctively feel that, especially given what we were dealing with last year, to remove that in its entirety will invite problems.
Mr. Chair, I can't speak to what happened last year, so I'm certainly inclined to go with your instinct on how it's gone with the House in the past. I think, hearing from some folks who've emailed us, et cetera, what always struck me, being on Ways and Means and working with the bigger communities, is it was really the biggest communities who were able to send someone professionally to help make the case for some change. Can you extend the time frame? Can you lift the cap? Can you help us? And if we're trying to help these smaller communities, allowing them to not have to come to the legislature to make their case feels like the way to sort of give them the true tools they need to work with, our direct economic development staff to get this done. And the Ways and Means may put a cap back in, but if we start with a cap of a certain size and it goes back down, then I think we're sort of placing a limitation on folks that we'll have to fight about later on. That is pretty constraining.
Excellent point. I still think we should do a cap, but we should do that with that in mind, what the figure is. That
Right.
We're going to be negotiating down.
Yes.
I agree. We should, I think we're going to have a potentially more favorable route in finance this year, given the testimony we heard from Middlebury on this. We have two members of Addison County new members of Addison County on the committee. I think they'll be very well versed in the needs of Middlebury. So we got a lot of pushback last year in finance for reasons I'm not entirely clear of, but okay, let's move on. No decisions made here, but it sounds like Senator Rao makes a good point. So if we do a cap, we'll do it with the idea that we may be negotiating down from there. And I'm suggesting that we wind up at some cap that really doesn't, maybe in a very isolated circumstance, adversely impacts an applicant. I want to set it high.
One question that I've got, as we started this kind of brief discussion on community size being a driver for the kind of TIF that exists, Middlebury was talking about our new TIF program, correct? In their discussion, Mike?
Yes, yes, they were.
Yeah, and I just look at the size of Middlebury from a population standpoint of 8661, and then compare it to St. Albans, which has a TIF population of 6,444. Now, one of the things that I don't know, as we talked about conventional TIFs before, the town that has the TIF, in some cases a town, in some it's a village, but we haven't really thought about things that are regional in nature. And that to me is just something in the back of our minds that we ought to be thinking about. Because if we look at a population area, let's say St. Albans of 6,444 is St. Albans town, the city is 6,804. So the combined of this very small area is about 12 or 13,000. That may or may not play any impact or any role in what we're thinking about vis-a-vis mini TIFs. Because again, some of the villages that are part of towns are also relatively small. So it's again, just a thought that I think we should be mulling around as we try to figure out what's the best solution in terms of the applicability.
Yeah, it raises the question for me is I think I know the answer, but could a town like St. Albans come in under this mini TIF new law, given if we set a population threshold? And I don't think we want to see mini TIFs as an alternative way to the more comprehensive TIF and come in with several single use or single project TIFs. But I can't imagine that a town would want to do it in a piecemeal fashion like that. So they would self-select the more comprehensive version if they had the resources and professional ability to do that. So maybe you should, before we leave this, maybe you should, I mean, I think you raised the issue, Megan, about maybe restricting it to population size of it.
I did.
Okay.
And I would say that maybe that could be one of two criteria. We could have a couple criteria, one of which, is, or eligibility. One is projects under X amount, and two is the population. I would say is smaller than 6,000, because, to Randy's point, St. Albans has been perfectly capable of handling a regular TIF. I don't quite know why Middlebury can't handle a regular TIF. They have a full-time staff and town manager. So I don't kind of get why they can't do a regular TIF. Because for me, the Westford populations, the smaller towns, are the ones we're trying to identify here. And if you do populations of over 6,000, you're not getting that crowd. I mean, that's a lot of our towns. Whereas if you limit it to towns of 5,000 or fewer, you're really getting at the smaller communities, or even 4,000 and fewer.
I want to move us on, though. This is a pretty important. Megan only got to our first point and we're stuck, but this is an important issue. I want to let Megan respond instinctively. Again, I think if you put a population cap on this, you're going to invite political problems to the towns that are just above that, and questions. I'd rather have some more generic language as to what we're trying to get at, and give the department some discretion as to how to allow people in and out. But go ahead, Megan.
Did you want me to respond in any way to that, or move on to the next item?
No, I wanted to give you the last word on population thresholds.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's other reasons that a town may not be looking at the larger TIF district program. Even a town with a larger population size that has other obligations that they're paying for, and may have one project that is what they see as sort of the critical piece that they need to get done. Rather than, again, with the TIF district program, it's a lot of work to identify 10 years worth of projects, 10 years worth of private development that are going to come from that project. So, I think there is some limitations there for all communities that are looking at what is our capacity long-term to do this type of redevelopment. And St. Albans certainly is a good case of where the community got together and had a vision of what type of transformational change they wanted to see, and have a very committed staff to seeing through these projects over the long term.
Okay, and I would say that keep in mind that, again, this is going to be in the nature of a pilot program. And I think we had one criteria in there that if you have a TIF district already.
Right, yeah, St. Albans would not be able to apply for this program because they already have a TIF district.
Which we want, if we're going to allow for 10 or 15 projects over the next 3 years, we don't want Burlington coming in and taking one of those. So, and I think we have that restriction.
Yeah, they would not be eligible.
Right. I understand that, but I also don't want a pilot where a whole bunch of towns with full-time staff take advantage of a simpler TIF program just because they're able to. Okay. I really think this should be targeted to communities that have fewer resources and that are quite a bit smaller. That's what the Westford model is. Middlebury is a different kettle of fish, I think.
Okay, so my request, as I did in the last hearing, is this is an important issue. Who qualifies here? And I would like you, Megan, to work with Rebecca to come up with some language. I think you hear some of the senses of the committee to come up with language that, if this is going to be, 10 or 15 projects over the next few years, how do we target it at the most appropriate towns? Okay, so let's move on. What other concerns did you have with the bill as introduced?
Sure. I think, a small one was adding the definition of coordinating agency. The bill already says that we can use what's in the TIF rule, which has coordinating agency, but just felt it was really important because, as Senator Clarkson mentioned, these towns are going to need, they don't have as much professional staff, so they really need that assistance, whether it's an RDC or an RPC or other technical assistance, really defining that coordinating agencies are allowed in this program. Felt important.
What does that, what does that mean?
A coordinating agency is an outside organization that can assist in the development of a TIF plan and the administration of the TIF. So it would be someone like the RDC or the RPC. A community could look at a private consultant, but as costs rise, there's VEPC would look at what are the costs of the related cost as compared to the improvement costs. So again, this should be far less expensive, but
we have to say that in statute that this is how they develop their plan, that they can.
Well, that's a related cost, so that this isn't an unfunded mandate for the RDCs or the RPCs, that they can recuperate costs, and so it's an eligible related cost in the program.
Okay, got it. Okay.
We looked at the definition of project, and this came up from testimony last week, but to say, is it a single improvement or could they bring multiple improvements in a project? So I think an example of this is if you have wastewater that you put in, the same contractor likely is going to have to repave the road and put in sidewalks or lighting. So that's sort of all one project. It could be done by all one contractor, but those would be different improvements. So how do we allow for different improvements that are all related to the same project? I think everyone would agree that yes, those are all part of the same project, but just wanting to make it really specific so there aren't questions over whether, well, should you have paid for that repaving if you did the wastewater? So offered some language there about the improvements that are contiguous. There was an alternative language that I received that they're integral to the expected private development, but something that would allow for those multiple improvements to happen under the one project.
Okay.
The state auditor's office identified the term TIF project zone, which we think is great, works well for it's not a district, but it's that zone of parcels that have expected redevelopment that have nexus with the public improvements that are going to happen.
So what happens, using the Westford example, you build this wastewater treatment plant, and in terms of their expected private development in their proposal, I remember they defined their, I don't know if you call it the district or whatever, but they defined it as
the project zone.
Project zone as like 10 parcels.
Right. So there's I think for Westford, it may be even 7 parcels where they're expecting to see redevelopment because of having that capacity. So it would be limited to those parcels in which there is an expected redevelopment, and it would be those that are used for that increment. Now, there will likely be other parcels that will benefit from that wastewater. And the increment, if the grand list goes up for those parcels, that increment will go directly to the education fund and to the municipality. Right. So I think that's a benefit for everyone, and it's just those fewer parcels with the expected redevelopment that are going to be sort of set aside for the increment to be used.
Do you? When you approve envisioning it going into the future, if you approve a project like this and they identify 7 parcels, do you do anything to verify that those parcels are likely to be developed?
Yeah, that would be part of the TIF plan, is what is the expected development? And we'd want to see, more than just a hope and a dream, but that there's been communication with the developer, or the landowner has plans and ideas, because you do need to have that private development come online not too long after the public improvement does, because that's what generates the increment that's making those debt payments.
Okay. All right, so continue with like your significant changes you'd like to see, and
Sure.
then we'll go to Becky, and then we'll come back to that laundry list of concerns people have raised.
Yeah. So the approval process, this is a new section that we added. This a lot of the language is taken from the TIF district program, but it just talks about, what is VEPC's responsibility in the approval process, and what are we asking communities, what information are we asking them to provide us with? The authorizing vote, Stephanie Clark brought this up last week, that it's one, the authorizing vote is, a vote that the majority of voters approve, pass, not just if they have one vote and it fails, then they're done. Though, with a limited number, I think right now the language says 6, just the expectation that if a town has a failed vote and it doesn't get off the ground, then that may limit the projects that actually move forward to 5. And we would certainly be in favor of raising that limit from 6 to 10 to 15, as you had said, Senator.
You raised the point that it shouldn't be limited to one vote, which might fail. They could come back under different circumstances and pass it. How long under the bill as introduced, or what you're suggesting, does the town have a chance to get a successful vote? How many years?
They have 3 years from VEPC approval to incur their first debt, with the possibility of requesting a 3-year extension to that. So incurring the debt is when they actually go, take the money from the bond bank. So that would be after a authorizing vote. So it's a pretty quick turnaround for a municipality who's, in the planning phase, to say, okay, we've got approval to use TIF and to get everything together to go to a vote, and then incur the debt.
So Stephanie's comment would probably be more relevant in a traditional TIF, but 6 years is still an opportunity to do a revote. It's not right on the.
Right. It's just that VEPC can approve, in the current language, VEPC can approve 6 projects in the next 3 years. So if
the bill is introduced, we could change that.
Yeah, right. So it would just be if a project didn't move forward and they ended up saying, this isn't going to work, we wouldn't have the opportunity to say, okay, well, one of those other projects can now be reviewed. It would, that time frame would close. But
the issue you're raising is slightly different than Stephanie. She wanted a second bite at the apple of voting.
Right.
Which I think has a little bit of value, but not that great of value in such a short time period.
The original taxable value, we agree that, needs to have a date. April 1st is a date that is in the current TIF program from, the tax department and grand list year. We are suggesting that that original taxable value be set when the voters approve the measure, rather than when VEPC does, because of those years in between. There are chances, and we've seen this in district programs, where communities who have a decreasing grand list are nervous about setting the original taxable value when VEPC approves the district, and then 5 years down the line, they're already in the hole, so to speak, because from when that original taxable value has been certified, the grand list has slightly decreased. So setting it for when the town approves the vote to incur debt would keep any of those, potential fluctuations, whether it's growth or decrease, from being overly influenced, but also keeping the I think the feature in that, if you demolish a building and then don't rebuild it, that is not going to be captured in the original taxable value you'll still have to make up that decrease as a way to incentivize communities to move forward with projects.
So is this something that you're suggesting for this new program, or are you
Right.
suggesting it for the district program as well?
For this program,
Why wouldn't you suggest it for the district program?
I could suggest it for the district program. We don't have a vehicle right now to do that, but
Okay, I just want to make sure I'm
Yeah.
understanding it. Not suggesting you do that right now, but okay. Okay. Anything else?
and just I think there's a few more smaller pieces, but I think those are the main points that we were looking at, changes from as drafted.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. Becky, can we pull the bill up, the latest version of the bill on the screen, and can you walk us through it? And feel free to highlight the points that we've just been discussing in case we miss it.
Sure. So let me just make this a little bigger. Is everyone able to see that?
Can make it a little bigger, I think.
Okay.
Okay.
So Becky Wasserman, Legislative Counsel. This is a strike all amendment to the S33 as introduced. And I've highlighted in yellow where all the changes were, most of which Megan just mentioned. So let me know if you need any more detail. I can mostly just point out some of the main points unless you'd like to go over any of the language in more detail. But section 1 is a list in statute of the municipalities that have been authorized to use education tax increment financing for TIF districts. And so in this pilot program, there's language that says if you already have a TIF district as set forth in this list, then you are not eligible to get this TIF project financing. So this list has been updated to include Bennington and Montpelier, which have approved TIF districts now and were not on that list before. In section 2, the auditor raised this point that there's in Title 32, there's a reference to this list that says that the council, this is on line 16, shall not approve more than 6 districts. And it says, but it's not counted towards those that are in this this list of already approved districts. So because we're adding in Bennington and Montpelier, this had to be updated to say that it's 4 districts. So VEPC can only approve 4 more TIF districts. And then there is also language that references, two.
Can I just stop? Can I just stop you? This is for districts, right? We're talking
This is
about
for districts. It's sort of cleaning up because the list of districts is cross-referenced in this pilot program. So this is cleaning up that language because we have this list in statute that says here are the districts that are approved, but it's not actually accurate. And so to reference, if you have a TIF district pursuant to this list, you can't get a TIF project. It has to reflect who actually has a TIF district.
Oh, so I'm puzzled how this interplays with the mini TIFs. So once these are identified, you couldn't have a mini TIF within these?
So if you're on, there's language I'll point out as we get there, but there's language that says if you're on this list, you cannot get a TIF project.
Yeah,
Okay, which is our words for mini TIFs.
right.
Yes,
Right.
many TIFs. Yeah. So section 2 is essentially just cleaning up this restriction on future TIF districts such that it now lines up with this, updating that list. So rather than 2 per county, it's saying you can have 4 districts, not 6. And in Bennington and Washington counties, you can only have 1 because we have Bennington and Montpelier now. So that is the sort of summary of these changes here. It's really just cleanup language.
But when you, by using the word, when you say 4, not 6, we want, how many projects are we wanting?
This
I
is
thought we were
not,
still wanting 6 projects.
No,
this is not,
This is
this
the,
is
Okay.
not the projects. This is
Okay,
just the
got
TIF
it.
districts. This was
Got
language
it.
we put in, I believe in 2016 that
Yeah.
limited the number of TIF districts that that VEPSI
Right.
could approve going forward. And
Right.
so since then, it's been 2 have been approved.
okay, so this is a real technical question, but do we really need this change from 6 to 4? Wouldn't people look at when this law was passed and how many had been enabled since then and say, well, you've used up 2 of your 6, so now it's down to 4. Do we have to keep changing the law every time we add a new district?
Yeah, I
that's a
mean,
good-
I think it's problematic that we have this restriction in statute because it does raise a question that every time a TIF district is approved, that this is going to be an issue. And it's the same with having a list of the approved districts in statute, because that is a changing landscape as VEPSI
Yeah.
approves more TIF districts.
All right,
You
let's
know,
move
you could,
on. Yeah, let's move on. I mean,
okay,
I get it. It's not really our big issue right here, so.
okay.
But it is
Um,
an issue to flag, I think. You're right.
So section 3 is now we're moving away from TIF districts to the mini TIFs, the TIF projects. So the subsection A are the definitions that are used for this pilot program. Megan mentioned some changes here. Coordinating agency was added to this definition list, and I can go over these. I think maybe she explained them, but if you want me to walk through it, I'm happy to do so.
No, that's okay. We're good on this. I
Okay.
think.
I have noted a decision point, which this is also in the memo that Megan prepared. The definition of financing here includes reference to the use of bond anticipation notes. This was something that was raised last year, and whether it should apply to TIF districts. So it was included in this bill with respect to TIF projects. So of course, there's a somewhat conflict of whether we put it in this bill, it's not applying to TIF districts, but I think maybe VEPSI's position is that it's still relevant and necessary for TIF projects. But I think this is just a policy decision of whether you want to include that in here.
I, for one, am not fully understanding what's going on here. I remember we did spend an inordinate amount of time in finance on this. So you're saying, should bond anticipation notes be allowed for projects as well as districts, or?
So this is allowing, sort of restricting when bond anticipation notes can be used during the time period which a municipality may incur debt. I think the issue, and maybe this was raised by the auditor's office last year, was that it sort of delays by a year the time for a municipality to incur debt or to get permanent financing. And so last year there was language that would have sort of clarified that for the TIF districts, but that bill didn't make it through. But it was added to this bill with respect to TIF projects. So I think there is an argument from VEPSI that it's still relevant here for this bill. I just raised the point that you don't have any corresponding language for the TIF
So
districts.
Megan, is it more relevant here for small projects versus the unsuccessful effort last year for which project? Because all things being equal, I'd just like to follow what we do for districts.
Yeah, I think it could be even more relevant because of the shorter time period, the 3 or 6 years versus the 5 to 10 years. What it really comes down to is a timing issue where if you go to voters in November, if there is a winter bond sale, it can be very challenging to get everything you need together in order to incur debt by then. So if you go to the summer bond sale and your debt incurrence period ends on April 1st, you've missed the window. So your vote happened in time, but you couldn't actually incur the debt because you can only incur the debt during the municipal bank's bond sale. So the ban allows you to take out a ban and have that first incurrence of debt. And as long as it's rolled into permanent financing, so you go to the bond bank in the summer to take out that debt, then that's considered your permanent. Then you've met your debt incurrence window. So it really is just a timing issue of when municipalities hold votes and when the bond bank has sales. So
okay, so we could talk about this some more. My inclination is to take it out. It's complicating and it's a much smaller project here. And if they can't get their stuff together in that time, then, it's, but we can talk about it more. Let's move on.
Okay.
So there's a similar issue in the definition of improvements of not having a corresponding language with the definition of improvements. And this was also brought up last year that whether or not the funding debt service interest payments can be done with the debt proceeds. So this is saying that you can do that for a period of up to 5 years after the debt is first incurred. So again, it's just an issue of whether you want it here, but it's not necessarily available for TIF districts.
If we got rid of the section we just talked about, is this distinct from that? Could they?
This is
survive
distinct, yeah.
separately? Okay, we have the same discussion to have here. I remember a very hard discussion last year in finance. Let's go on.
So there are a few other new definitions. There's a definition of nexus, and this is referencing the definition of a new definition of TIF project zone, which I'll get to in just a moment. So I think this was a question raised by the auditor of trying to figure out what improve, because there's no sort of boundaries and parcels included, what this project has a nexus to determine the development area. And I believe this definition of nexus comes from the TIF rule, the TIF project rule that's applied to TIF district rule that's applied to these projects.
Is this where Megan was using the word integral? I don't see the word integral here.
That was in the definition of project, but do agree nexus is an important piece to have in there, that the project have nexus to the redevelopment or new developments that are anticipated.
Okay. Can you give an example in terms of nexus or integral? Like if you're building a wastewater treatment plant, obviously you want lighting around there, you want sidewalks around the perimeter, but where does it, if the downtown, the 7 parcels are going to be developed, where do their potential sidewalk improvements fit in? Are they part of the increment or are they part of the bond funding?
So the nexus would be, there has to be a nexus between the public improvements and the project. So
And
the private
private
development.
development.
So that, and especially for this program where the boundary the zone is smaller. We're talking about the 7 parcels as opposed to a TIF district where you may have 200 parcels. The nexus between those properties and the public improvements is important. That's going to be a determining factor on how we know which parcels to allow. So there's the location criteria that will limit it, and then it's going to be looking at what is the nexus between that public improvement and the private development, the parcels that are included. So we're not including 15 other parcels that really have nothing to do with the public improvements that are going on, or that you're not doing a sidewalk over here and a wastewater line on the other side of the designated downtown. Those would be separate projects. This is really
Right.
the relation between the two.
Okay, so just to follow up, so I'm clear, using the sidewalk example, you build a sidewalk around the wastewater treatment plant so people can service the wastewater plant. That's obviously part of the project. Could Westford come in and say, we also want, as part of our project-based TIF, improvement to public infrastructure of those 7 parcels, like sidewalks and street lamps and stuff, or is that now not a single project-based TIF application?
So I would actually sort of phrase it the other way, where the wastewater plant is likely outside of the designated downtown or the village center. So there's nexus between, adding water capacity at the plant and the improvements that are being done for those properties. And when you're putting in the wastewater line, you're going to have to dig up
The road.
So repaving the road is going to be an improvement that has to be done because you're putting in this wastewater. So, nexus in part is going to be, you can upgrade the capacity at the wastewater plant that's outside of the downtown because it's serving those parcels in the downtown.
Yeah, I don't know if other people are, if I'm not being articulate here. I can understand that as part of the development, infrastructure development of this project, you're digging up the road, you have to build a new road. But where does the sidewalk around the new buildings that are being developed in the project, where does that fall in the bucket of the buildings that are being refurbished or gentrified or whatever, or does it fall as part of sewage development? Is it part of the cap infrastructure, or is it part of the increment?
So that's part of the public infrastructure that will drive the private development. So they're going to have wastewater, they're going to put in the new road, and then the streetscaping around it, when this is all being done in one, likely by one contractor and one development agreement that they will do these public improvements, and the private developer will do, a 3-story mixed use building with affordable units. So that's where we're looking at adjusting the definition of project to include multiple public improvements, as long as they're all integral to that private development.
Okay.
But trying to thread the needle so that it isn't used to have basically a TIF district in the project program.
Right. Okay, so that's a little different than I thought. I thought we were just talking about the infrastructure being the wastewater treatment plant, and that's it. but it's now expanded to other infrastructure improvements. Okay.
So the next new definition here is project, which no longer has that $1.5 million cap. And it sounds like Megan and I will be working on this a little bit more. But right now it is actually taking some language that was previously in the introduced version referencing the approval process, but there's actually a new approval process here. Looking at it didn't quite fit. It's more just, it's saying that a project has to meet certain criteria, and it seemed to fit here of it in the definition section of what those projects had to look like. So so now the project is referencing those criteria, that it has to be one of 4 of these. So this is the current definition of product, but I understand that we're going to be working on it more to perhaps add some sort of cap. But these criteria are that it includes newer rehabilitated affordable housing, that will affect remediation and redevelopment of a brownfield located within the district, that it would include at least one entirely new business or business operation or expansion of an existing business and provide new quality full-time jobs, or that it would enhance transportation by creating improved traffic patterns and flow, or creating or improving public transportation systems.
I didn't see the page before. Is this in the alternative, or all 4 of these have to be met?
It's one of 4.
Okay.
Or at least one.
At least one of 4.
That's similar to the district, isn't it? I think. Yeah. Okay.
The district is at least 3, because again, we're talking 10 years, multiple projects.
Right. Rebecca, we have Becky, we have probably about 5 minutes. You think you could try and condense the next 11 pages?
Sure. So
Okay.
I'll just, so there's this new definition of TIF project zone, which came from the auditor, and I think Megan explained that. Subsection B is just authorizing the pilot program, and the dates were modified here because they were, the date had already passed in the previous version. So this is updating that. In terms of the eligibility requirements, right now it references where the project will serve either an approved designation approved by the Vermont Downtown Development Board, or located within an industrial park. So this is just a committee decision on keeping this definition of industrial park, because this was raised as a concern about whether this should, this was the correct definition that should be referenced here. And I believe this is explained in Megan's memo as well.
Is the designations, that's downtowns, neighborhood development areas, is it also called village centers too?
That's under that
All 3
reference,
of them?
yeah, in chapter 76A, yeah.
Okay.
I guess I'll highlight here in subsection E, the approval process. So before this was raised by the auditor, that there wasn't really an explanation of what the application would be and how BEPC would approve these projects. So I think Megan mentioned this, but now this approval process is more substantial as to what would have to be included in an application, that there would be a TIF project plan required. And so this language here in subsection E is just going through what that process is. And this is a similar process to what is required for TIF districts. So I'm just going along here, but if you have any questions, you can stop me. Then under incurring indebtedness, I just highlighted this here about this question of having one authorizing vote that was raised as whether or not you should allow a municipality to go back for an additional vote if the first one fails. And then I've also added some language here on line 16 about this was raised by the auditor of that there's no reference to when the project would be created sort of date wise. So this is saying it's April 1st of the calendar year based on when the municipal legislative body votes to approve the debt. I think a committee decision here needs to be made on whether or not this needs to be when the municipality votes to approve the debt or votes to approve the TIF plan. And I think VEPSI has a preference that's noted in the memo on actually having it be for approving the debt. Is that correct, Megan?
Yeah, but it would be when the municipal voters approve the debt,
Okay.
not the legislative body would just approve the plan.
Okay. So I think this is just another decision point for the committee.
And we have other places in statute that I may not remember where we have to say 12:01 a.m.
Yeah, this is similar language to the TIF district. I think it references also the approval of the TIF, adoption of the TIF plan for the TIF districts.
And this date is anticipating that all of those votes will take place around town meeting day.
Yeah, I think it also has to do with when the grand list is,
Yeah,
the tax department does the grand list appraisals
That-
by
that
April
April-
1st.
That's the April 1st date.
I'm glad I
Right.
asked.
Yeah, that's the grand list has to be set on that date.
So if it's a town meeting day or a November vote, it would be set on that April 1st.
Either way. Okay.
Yep.
Okay, I just had to change the subsection headings there.
And while Becky's looking for that, did everybody get Fred Kenny's notes too?
Mhm.
No, we're going to be coming back to this.
Yeah. No, I just want to make sure we see all of these.
So on page 13, under the use of the tax increment, there's now a new subdivision that says that VEPSI will do that determination of having a nexus between the improvement and expected development and redevelopment for the project in the TIF project zone. And on page 14, under the information reporting by municipality, in subdivision 2, this said, this is just being changed to sort of recognize the fact that there's only one authorizing vote right now. So rather than being sort of like annually required that they provide this information, it would just be as required by VEPSI and the tax department, because it's because the TIF districts have sort of more necessary to provide this information more frequently than you would under this type of project. And I believe that might, yes. And so under the annual reporting requirement, there's just now the reference to what is being reported to the General Assembly, and it's just kind of updating this to reference this new definition of TIF project zone, that what will be in there is the scope and value of the projected and actual improvements and developments in the TIF project zone. And then I believe that was it.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, we're going to take a break, but I just want to say that we're going to take this up again on Friday, along with the relocated workers and S79, which is which we're going to get to next. So I just want to ask Kate very briefly, because you've been very patient. In 1 minute, I think you had made 3 sort of suggestions to this bill. Have any of them been talked about today? We can have you certainly back on Friday.
We referenced the opportunity for the committee to change the definition of industrial park, and I have not seen VEPSI's comments on that proposal in the VEPSI memo, nor Fred Kenny's. My own comment on that is that I think it's important to have a more constrained and precise definition of industrial park, because it would help ensure that industrial park parcels remain available for industrial uses as opposed to becoming office parks, which can happen and has happened. And I also think that given the more discrete nature of the project-based TIF with a one project, one incurrence of debt, I think it could be used for industrial parks more readily, which makes precision in the definition all the more important. And I think the Act 250 definition is the way to go. I can speak more to the origins of that definition. I won't now, but I'm happy to talk more or listen more later on.
And just to fill you in, all Fred says in his memo is retain authority to use this project-based financing tool for development in an industrial park.
Okay.
So
the Act 250 definition could be a compromise to make sure that we're really making that industrial space, which isn't appropriate in downtowns and villages, available for those industrial uses.
I would agree. That's a good one.
Thank you.
I'm happy to speak on that now or wait until Friday, whatever the committee is preference.
Is our chair still with us, or has he started? Michael, are you with us?
He has lost his signal.
Yeah.
He will
So I
rejoin
think
after
this
the
would
break.
be a good moment for a break. And I think to answer your question, Megan, Friday.
And Megan, it might help us too to have like a little bit more of a small FAQ on the bands, the benefit. What is it? What was
Sure. The bond anticipation notes.
Yes. And
Sure.
a definition, I didn't want to sound too totally, it would be great to understand what that is, the anticipation notes. I mean, that in
Yes,
anticipating
I hear
us issuing this bond, what does it mean?
Right. What is it? Yep.
Yeah, what is it is a good question.
Sure.
Thanks. Okay, we're on break until